The Anglo-Saxons and Vikings. Wiltshire. The area of Wiltshire came under Anglo-Saxon rule from the 6th century. We find battles recorded, with debatable dates, as having occurred at Cerebor, Old Sarum, Wiltshire, in 552, Barbary Castle, Wiltshire, in 556, at Dirham, Gloucestershire, in 577, at Woden's Barrow, Adam's Grave near Orton Priors, Wiltshire, in 592, at Cirencester, Gloucestershire, in 628, at Bradford-on-Avon, Wiltshire, in 652, and at Peanan, probably Penselwood, Somerset, in 658. It was then that the area became part of the Kingdom of Wessex.
The Kingdom of Wessex, or the Kingdom of the West Saxons, was one of the dominant kingdoms, important kingdoms of Anglo-Saxon England. And Wessex grew into this powerful force to dominate south of the River Thames. So the heartland of Wessex was in Hampshire and Wiltshire, Berkshire as well, and expanded east and west from those areas to eventually dominate right the way from Kent, which came into the Kingdom of Wessex in about the 820s, right the way through into Devon and Cornwall. Cornwall was brought into Wessex in the 10th century. So south of the Thames, the dominant Anglo-Saxon kingdom was the Kingdom of Wessex. We think its origins lay in two main areas, two separate areas. One at the head of Southampton Water from the end of the 5th century, and for a similar period of time in the Thames Valley. And the Thames Valley Saxons called themselves the Gevisi, but somewhere in the 650s, 670s, they came to dominate the southern Anglo-Saxons, and the fusion between those two little kingdoms became called Wessex. So about 700, there is a kingdom that's called Wessex. It's the kingdom of the West Saxons. And that goes on to eventually become the kingdom of the whole of England, because the other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were destroyed by Viking invaders in the 9th century. And then after about AD 900, it's the one surviving kingdom, Wessex, that goes on to then defeat these Viking kingdoms in the Midlands and in East Anglia, absorb them into Greater Wessex, if you like, and what comes out of that is a United Kingdom of England after AD 954. The last king, Viking king of York, Eric Bloodaxe, dies in 954, and at that point, that's when this southern English kingdom becomes the kingdom of the whole of England. But it's fair to say it's kings of Wessex who become this dominant dynasty in the end for the whole of England.
The Shire of Wiltshire takes its name from Wilton. Dilton lay in the extreme west of this unit of Anglo-Saxon local government. The Domesday Book, 1086, which was commissioned by William the Conqueror, gives us an insight into the late Anglo-Saxon community.
The Domesday Book, which was compiled in 1086, doesn't actually mention Dilton. But we think that Dilton was combined with Bratton as part of the royal manor of Westbury. And in 1086, it was held by a Norman called William Scudet. His surname means shield, and this block of land was 4.5 hides. A hide was an indeterminate area of land, but about enough to keep a extended family going for a year. So 4.5 hides is a significant but not huge block of territory, but a significant one. And Domesday Book says that there was land there sufficient to keep 7 plough teams in operation.
Clearings from older woodland, itself almost certainly managed woodland regenerated since the end of the Roman period, is evidenced in minor names containing the Old English lea, cleared woodland, such as Hissomley and Penley. The name Short Street may refer to a paved way, as in Old English the word straight was often used to indicate this. The focus of the original settlement was at what is now known as Old Dilton, as the land to the northern area, now Dilton Marsh, was lower lying and wet. The hollow way known as the Drove may well have been the original axis of a dispersed settlement of scattered farmsteads.
The Holloway, that we know as the Drove, was part of a significant set of features in the landscape, which are droveways. And effectively, droveways are connecting routeways that link up a series of settlements. And we think that the drove probably connected up a series of scattered settlements that probably go back to the Roman period and even earlier. And they link up the lower lying, more wooded territory on the clay lands with the lighter wooded, or in fact probably not wooded by this period of time, on the higher chalk. So in that sense they provide a connection between the chalk lands and the clay lands, and they're useful ways for moving of people and livestock from one set of landscape features to the other. They link up different landscape features.
The area experienced Viking attacks in the 9th century, as it was at nearby Edington that Alfred defeated the Danes under Guthrum in 878. There is, though, no evidence of Scandinavian settlement in the vicinity of Dilton, apart from the Scandinavian form of the personal name preserved in the nearby place name of Thulston.
The place name Thulston is interesting because it's quite a rarity in Wiltshire. It takes its name from a Danish landowner, a Viking landowner. In Wiltshire, there are far fewer of these Old Norse place names, Danish place names, than if we were in Lincolnshire, for example, or parts of East Anglia or Yorkshire. And that's because although there was Viking raiding and a great deal of activity in Wiltshire, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is clear about that, there wasn't the level of settlement in Wiltshire by any means that we find in areas known as the Danelaw, which basically means eastern and northern England. Nevertheless, the place name Thulston is interesting because it suggests that probably the person that lived there was a Danish or an Anglo-Danish landowner. It's difficult to date when this place name occurred, and it doesn't necessarily indicate that the person so named was of Viking ancestry, but it's suggestive of that fact. And so it's not unreasonable to suggest that the person that owned Thulston, who gave their name to the settlement there, was probably a Danish or an Anglo-Danish landowner of the 11th century, since we know that a number of key estates in England were granted to Danes during the reign of Canute. And Canute reigned between 1016 and 1035. He was king of Denmark and he also king of England. But that has to be supposition, even though it's a reasonable supposition.